The champagne glasses clinked around me like tiny bells of exclusion, each sound a reminder that I didn't belong here, or so they thought. Every eye in that pristine country club dining room was fixed on me, their stares cutting through the afternoon sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, as if my very presence had shattered some unspoken rule of their perfectly manicured world. The silence stretched between us like a chasm, filled with assumptions, judgments, and the kind of quiet hostility that money can buy but cannot hide. Which country are you listening from? Tell us in the comments below. My name is Maya Richardson, and 3 months ago I was living what I thought was the American dream. I had just completed my MBA from Wharton, where I graduated summa cum laude with a concentration in strategic management and entrepreneurship. The diploma hanging in my Connecticut office represented more than academic achievement. It was proof that a little black girl from Detroit could climb any mountain if she was willing to work twice as hard and shine twice as bright. I had landed a 6-figure position as Vice President of Operations at Miller & Associates, a prestigious investment firm known for managing portfolios worth hundreds of millions of dollars. My corner office overlooked the Connecticut River, and my business cards carried the weight of institutional respect. I had purchased my first home in Riverside Heights, one of those picture-perfect suburban neighborhoods where the lawns are always emerald green, the mailboxes stand at perfect attention like well-dressed soldiers, and the property values reflect generations of accumulated privilege. At 32, I was everything my grandmother had prayed I would become during those Sunday mornings when she used to braid my hair in her small kitchen, her weathered hands working magic while she whispered stories of ancestors who had built empires with nothing but determination and unwavering faith. She would tell me about great-great-grandmother Evelyn, who had owned a successful seamstress business in Reconstruction-era Alabama, and great-uncle Samuel, who had been one of the first black professors at a northern university in the 1940s. "Baby girl," she would say, her voice carrying the music of the South and the strength of generations, "we come from excellence. Don't you ever let anyone convince you otherwise. Your blood carries the dreams of people who died believing their children would see better days." I was a successful black woman in corporate America, navigating boardrooms with the same grace my mother had taught me to carry myself through life, head high, shoulders back, never apologizing for taking up space that I had earned through merit and dedication. My resume was flawless. Phi Beta Kappa from Howard University, where I had been student body president and captain of the debate team. 2 years as a financial analyst at Goldman Sachs in New York. The Wharton MBA that had cost me $60,000 in student loans but opened doors I never could have imagined from my grandmother's kitchen table. Connecticut had welcomed me with its autumn colors and colonial charm, its tree-lined streets and historic architecture speaking to a kind of American prosperity that felt both accessible and foreign. My colleagues respected my work ethic and analytical mind. David Miller himself had recruited me from Goldman, impressed by my presentation on emerging market opportunities and my track record of identifying undervalued assets before they became profitable investments. My neighbors in Riverside Heights waved from their driveways when I jogged past in the early morning hours, my breath creating small clouds in the crisp New England air. Mrs. Patterson, the elderly widow next door, brought me homemade cookies when I moved in and asked thoughtful questions about my work. The young couple across the street, Mark and Jennifer, invited me to their backyard barbecues where we discussed everything from local politics to the best hiking trails in the area. I had found my place in this world, or so I believed. The American dream had always been about merit, hard work, and achievement overcoming any obstacles. I had checked every box, crossed every finish line, and earned every credential. Discrimination was something from my grandmother's stories, from a time when America was less enlightened, less evolved. This was 2023 after all. We had elected a black president. We had black CEOs running Fortune 500 companies. We had black judges on the Supreme Court and black executives in every industry imaginable. The Riverside Country Club had been on my radar since my first week in town. Established in 1923, it sat on 47 pristine acres overlooking the Connecticut River, its Georgian colonial architecture speaking to a century of tradition and influence. This was the kind of place where business deals were sealed over 18 holes of championship golf, and networking happened over weekend brunches featuring locally sourced ingredients and wines from private collections. My boss, David Miller, had mentioned the club several times during our strategy meetings, noting how membership opened doors that remained forever closed to outsiders. "Maya, the real business in this town happens over dinner at the club," he had explained during one of our quarterly reviews. "The connections alone would be invaluable for your career trajectory. Thompson Industries, Hartwell Manufacturing, Pemberton Holdings, all the major players are members. If you're serious about building your client base and establishing yourself as a force in Connecticut finance, membership isn't optional. It's essential. I had nodded enthusiastically, already mentally calculating the membership fees and planning my application strategy. The initiation fee was substantial, $50,000, but the annual dues were reasonable, and the networking opportunities would pay for themselves within the first year. In my mind, it was simply the next logical step in building my professional network and establishing myself as a respected member of the Connecticut business community. I had researched the club extensively, studying its history, its championship golf course designed by Donald Ross in the 1920s, its prestigious tennis program that had produced several national junior champions, and its dining facilities that regularly hosted corporate retreats and political fundraisers. The club had weathered the Great Depression, 2 world wars, and multiple economic recessions while maintaining its reputation as the premier private club in the region. I had no idea that stepping through those mahogany doors would force me to confront a reality I thought I had left behind in my grandmother's stories of the Jim Crow South. I couldn't have imagined that my MBA from Wharton, my track record at Goldman Sachs, my 6-figure salary, and my impeccable professional reputation would be overshadowed by something as arbitrary and irrelevant as the color of my skin. The first meeting with David about club membership had taken place in his corner office on a crisp October morning. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating the diplomas and awards that covered his walls: Harvard MBA, various industry recognitions, photos with governors and senators and other people whose handshakes could change the trajectory of entire companies. "Maya, you should really consider joining the club," he had said, leaning back in his leather chair with the casual confidence of someone who had never questioned his right to belong anywhere. "The connections alone would be invaluable for your career trajectory. Plus, the golf course is magnificent, and I know you're working on improving your game." I had nodded, already envisioning myself on the practice green, perfecting my short game while building relationships with potential clients and strategic partners. Golf had been a recent addition to my skill set, something I had taken up during business school when I realized that major decisions were often made on the course rather than in conference rooms. "I'd love an introduction," I had replied, pulling out my phone to add a reminder to my calendar. "Should I reach out to the membership committee directly, or would you prefer to make the initial contact?" David had smiled, the kind of benevolent expression that suggested he was doing me a tremendous favor. "Let me give Charles Harrison a call. He's been on the membership committee for 20 years, knows everyone worth knowing. I'll set up a meeting for next week." That conversation had felt like a milestone, another step forward in my carefully planned ascent through the ranks of Connecticut's financial elite. I had gone home that evening to my beautiful colonial house, poured myself a glass of the expensive Bordeaux I saved for special occasions, and called my mother to share the good news. "Mama, I'm going to join the country club," I had said, unable to contain my excitement. "David thinks it will be incredible for building my client base and establishing myself in the community." There had been a pause on the other end of the line, the kind of silence that carries the weight of generational memory and hard-earned wisdom. My mother had grown up in the civil rights era, had witnessed the integration of schools and restaurants and public spaces that her parents' generation had been barred from entering. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," she had finally said, her voice carrying a note I couldn't quite identify. Just remember that some places take longer to catch up with the times than others. Don't let anyone make you feel like you don't belong there." At the time, I had dismissed her caution as unnecessary worry. This was Connecticut in 2023, not Alabama in 1963. The Riverside Country Club was a business establishment, not a relic of segregation. They would evaluate my application based on professional qualifications and character references, not on prejudices that had supposedly been relegated to history books and museum exhibits. How naive I had been. How thoroughly I had underestimated the persistence of certain American traditions. The first indication that something was amiss came during my initial visit to the club on a sunny Tuesday afternoon in October. The autumn foliage was at its peak, painting the Connecticut landscape in brilliant shades of amber and crimson that seemed to make everything glow with possibility. David had arranged for me to meet with the membership committee at 2 o'clock, and I had spent considerable time selecting my outfit. A navy Armani blazer I had purchased for client presentations, matching slacks that were perfectly tailored, and my grandmother's pearl earrings that she had given me for my college graduation. "Maya," she had said when she fastened those pearls around my neck, "these belong to your great-grandmother Evelyn. She wore them when she opened her dress shop in 1875, right after Reconstruction. She said they reminded her that she was building something that would last, something that would outlive any person who tried to tear it down." I had touched those pearls that morning as I looked in my bedroom mirror, feeling connected to a legacy of black women who had refused to accept limitations imposed by others. I was carrying their dreams with me into that club, their determination flowing through my veins like an inheritance more valuable than any trust fund. The drive to the club took me through some of the most beautiful countryside in Connecticut. Rolling hills dotted with centuries-old oak trees, stone walls that had been built by colonial farmers, and glimpses of the Connecticut River sparkling in the distance. The club's entrance was marked by an understated bronze sign that spoke to the kind of confidence that doesn't need to announce itself loudly. Old money whispers, new money shouts. The clubhouse was everything I had imagined and more. Marble floors that gleamed like mirrors reflecting the afternoon sunlight that streamed through tall windows, oil paintings of stern-faced men from bygone eras, their eyes following visitors as they moved through halls lined with dark wood paneling, crystal chandeliers that cast rainbow prisms across cream-colored walls decorated with hunting scenes and maritime landscapes. It smelled of old money and older traditions, leather and lemon oil and something indefinable that spoke of generations of privilege, of conversations conducted in hushed tones about matters that shaped industries and influenced elections. The air itself seemed to carry the weight of history, of decisions made by men in similar clubs that had determined the fate of companies, communities, and entire regions. I approached the hostess stand with confidence, my heels clicking against the marble floor in a rhythm that announced my arrival. Behind the mahogany desk sat a young blonde woman with a practiced smile and the kind of polished appearance that suggested finishing school and summers in the Hamptons. She looked up from her leather-bound reservation book, her blue eyes reflecting the same casual privilege that seemed to permeate every surface of the building. Her smile faltered almost imperceptibly when she saw me, like a record skipping for just a moment before resuming its rhythm. It was subtle, the kind of micro-expression that someone less attuned to such things might have missed entirely. But I had been the only black face in predominantly white spaces my entire professional life. I had learned to read the language of discomfort, to recognize the barely perceptible shift in energy that occurs when someone realizes they're dealing with an unexpected variable in their carefully ordered world. "Good afternoon," I said, extending my hand with the same professional warmth I used when meeting new clients. "I'm Maya Richardson. I have an appointment with Mr. Harrison from the membership committee." She stared at my outstretched hand for a moment longer than social convention dictated, as if trying to process information that didn't fit her preconceived categories. "Oh," she replied, her voice carrying a note of surprise that seemed to echo longer than it should have in the high-ceilinged foyer. Let me check on that for you." As she picked up her phone and dialed an extension, I became aware of the conversations around me gradually diminishing to whispers. It was like watching ripples spread across a still pond, the effect of my presence moving through the space in concentric circles of awkward awareness. A group of women in pristine tennis whites paused their animated discussion of weekend plans to stare, their eyes moving from my face to my outfit to some invisible checklist in their minds that I apparently wasn't passing. Two older gentlemen by the bar stopped their enthusiastic conversation about golf handicaps and recent stock market fluctuations to look in my direction. Their expressions weren't overtly hostile. This was Connecticut after all, not Mississippi in the 1950s. But there was something calculating in their gaze, as if they were trying to solve a puzzle that my presence had created in their orderly universe. It was the kind of attention that crawls under your skin and makes you hyper-aware of every breath, every movement, every choice you made that morning from your hairstyle to your handbag. I had experienced this before, the weight of being the only black face in predominantly white spaces, but something about this felt different. More deliberate. More sustained. More hostile beneath its veneer of politeness. The hostess hung up her phone and turned back to me with a smile that seemed to require conscious effort. "Mr. Harrison will be with you in just a moment. Please have a seat in our reception area." She gestured toward a collection of antique furniture arranged around a massive fireplace where a fire crackled despite the mild October weather. The chairs were upholstered in rich burgundy leather that had probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, and the coffee table held an artful arrangement of magazines, Town and Country, Golf Digest, Financial Times, along with a crystal bowl filled with individually wrapped Swiss chocolates. I settled into one of the chairs, crossing my legs and adjusting my blazer with the kind of careful attention to appearance that had become second nature in corporate environments. The leather was buttery soft and perfectly broken in, molded by decades of conversations about mergers and acquisitions, political campaigns and charitable galas, the kinds of decisions that shaped communities and determined economic futures. From my vantage point, I could observe the ebb and flow of club life around me. Members moved through the space with the casual confidence of people who had never questioned their right to belong anywhere. They greeted each other with first names and inside jokes, references to shared experiences and mutual connections that spoke to lifelong relationships built on common backgrounds and parallel trajectories. A woman in her 50s with perfectly coiffed silver hair and a Hermes handbag approached the hostess stand to make a dinner reservation. "Jennifer, darling," she said, her voice carrying the particular cadence of old Connecticut families, "I need a table for 8 on Saturday evening. The Pemberton anniversary party, you know. Make sure we get the corner table by the windows." Charles specifically requested the view of the river. "Of course, Mrs. Harrison," the hostess replied, already reaching for her reservation book. "Would 7:30 work for your party?" "Mrs. Harrison." I filed the name away, wondering if she was related to the Charles Harrison I was scheduled to meet. In places like this, family names carried weight across generations, creating networks of influence that extended far beyond individual achievement or merit. "Miss Richardson?" A tall, silver-haired man in his 60s approached from the direction of what I assumed were the club's administrative offices. He wore what I would later recognize as his polite dismissal expression, the kind of practiced neutrality that suggested extensive experience in delivering unwelcome news while maintaining plausible deniability about his personal feelings. "I'm Charles Harrison," he continued, extending his hand for a brief, professional handshake that managed to convey duty rather than enthusiasm. "Thank you for coming in today. I apologize for keeping you waiting." His handshake was firm but brief, lasting exactly the socially appropriate amount of time without a millisecond of additional warmth. His eyes met mine with the kind of direct gaze that politicians and businessmen perfect, present enough to seem engaged, distant enough to maintain emotional distance. "Not at all," I replied, standing and smoothing my blazer. "I appreciate you taking the time to meet with me. David Miller speaks very highly of the club and thought membership would be an excellent fit for my professional development." Something flickered across his expression at the mention of David's name, a micro-expression that suggested complicated feelings about my sponsor's endorsement. It was there and gone so quickly that I might have imagined it, but I filed it away in the mental catalog of small observations that my grandmother had taught me to maintain. "David is certainly one of our most valued members," Harrison replied carefully. "Please follow me to our conference room where we can speak more privately." As he led me through the dining room toward a private meeting area, I felt every conversation pause as we passed. It wasn't my imagination, the effect was too consistent, too synchronized to be coincidental. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Wine glasses remained suspended in midair. Conversations about quarterly earnings and vacation plans seemed to evaporate as we moved through their carefully orchestrated world. The attention wasn't curious or welcoming, it was evaluative, calculating, as if I were being weighed and measured against some invisible standard that had nothing to do with my professional qualifications or personal character. I could feel their eyes cataloging every detail: my posture, my clothing, my manner of speaking, my level of deference to Mr. Harrison's obvious authority. The conference room where Harrison led me was smaller than I had expected but exquisitely appointed. A mahogany table that could seat 8 dominated the space, surrounded by chairs upholstered in the same burgundy leather I had encountered in the reception area. Oil paintings of the club's founders gazed down from the walls, stern-faced men in formal dress whose expressions suggested they had built something designed to last far beyond their own lifetimes. "Please have a seat," Harrison said, gesturing to one side of the table while he took his place across from me. The positioning felt deliberately formal, creating a psychological distance that transformed what should have been a friendly conversation into something more resembling a job interview or legal deposition. 2 other men entered the room within moments, introducing themselves as Mr. Pemberton and Mr. Whitfield, both equally distinguished white men in their 60s who could have been cast in a movie about old Connecticut money. Pemberton was shorter and rounder, with the kind of florid complexion that suggested a lifetime of good wine and rich food. Whitfield was tall and lean, his silver hair perfectly styled and his suit clearly custom-tailored. Both men shook my hand with the same professional courtesy that Harrison had displayed, present but not warm, dutiful but not enthusiastic. They arranged themselves on the opposite side of the table, creating a visual dynamic that felt uncomfortably like a tribunal rather than a membership interview. The meeting itself was a masterclass in polite rejection disguised as due diligence. Mr. Harrison and his committee members asked me all the right questions about my background, profession, and interests. They nodded appropriately at my responses, took careful notes on their legal pads, and maintained the facade of serious consideration throughout our 45-minute conversation. "Tell us about your educational background, Miss Richardson," Pemberton began, his pen poised over his notepad as if my answer would be the most fascinating thing he had heard all day. I launched into my carefully prepared summary. My undergraduate degree from Howard University, where I had graduated summa cum laude with a double major in economics and political science. My time at Goldman Sachs, where I had been consistently rated in the top 10% of analysts in my class. My MBA from Wharton, where I had concentrated in strategic management and graduated with distinction. They nodded and made notes, asking follow-up questions about specific courses and professors, demonstrating the kind of thorough interest that suggested genuine consideration. But their body language told a different story entirely. The way Mr. Harrison's eyes never quite met mine when he spoke, instead focusing on points just over my shoulder or down at his notepad. How Mr. Pemberton kept glancing at his gold Rolex as if my presence was keeping him from more pressing matters, despite having cleared his schedule for this meeting. The way they exchanged quick, meaningful glances when they thought I wasn't paying attention. Silent communications that spoke volumes about conversations held in my absence. And your professional interests? Whitfield asked, his voice carrying the kind of cultivated accent that suggested prep school and Ivy League education. What draws you to investment management specifically? I explained my passion for identifying undervalued assets and helping clients build long-term wealth, sharing examples of successful investments I had recommended and the analytical frameworks I used to evaluate opportunities. I mentioned my particular expertise in emerging markets and my track record of beating market benchmarks consistently over the past 3 years. Again, they nodded and took notes, asking intelligent follow-up questions that demonstrated their own sophistication in financial matters. But underneath the professional veneer, I sensed something else. A subtle skepticism that suggested they were looking for reasons to reject my application rather than reasons to approve it. What about your community involvement? Harrison asked, leaning back in his chair with the kind of casual authority that comes from decades of being the person who makes decisions about other people's futures. The club places considerable emphasis on members who contribute meaningfully to the broader community. I outlined my volunteer work with Junior Achievement, where I taught financial literacy to high school students in underserved communities, and my board position with the Connecticut Women's Business Council, where I mentored young professionals entering the finance industry. I mentioned my annual donations to various educational charities and my participation in corporate diversity initiatives. As I spoke about my community involvement, I noticed something shift in their expressions, a subtle tightening around their eyes that suggested discomfort with the direction of the conversation. When I mentioned my work with diversity initiatives, Pemberton actually winced slightly, as if I had committed some social faux pas by acknowledging that such programs existed. That's admirable, Harrison said finally, his tone suggesting that admirable was not necessarily the same as desirable. We certainly appreciate members who are committed to various causes. The phrase various causes hung in the air like smoke from an extinguished candle, carrying implications that made my stomach tighten with recognition. This wasn't about my qualifications or my character or my potential contributions to club life. This was about something else entirely, something that had been decided before I walked through the door, something that my resume and recommendations and professional achievements could never overcome. The rest of the meeting proceeded according to script. They asked about my golf handicap, 12 and improving steadily, my dining preferences, I was exploring wine education and appreciated good cuisine, and my availability for club events, weekends were generally open, and I was excited about the networking opportunities. Each answer was received with polite nods and careful notes, but the emotional temperature in the room never warmed beyond professional courtesy. There were no moments of connection, no shared laughter over golf mishaps or amusing stories about client interactions. It felt like a performance designed to create the appearance of fairness while arriving at a predetermined conclusion. Well, Miss Richardson, Mr. Harrison said as our meeting concluded, closing his leather portfolio with the finality of someone who had completed an unpleasant but necessary task, we'll be in touch regarding your application. The committee meets monthly to review new membership requests, and will certainly give yours the consideration it deserves. The phrase, consideration it deserves, rang in my ears as I stood and shook hands with each committee member one final time. Their handshakes were identical to their initial greetings, professionally appropriate but emotionally vacant, conveying duty fulfilled rather than relationships begun. As I walked back through the dining room, the stares felt different, expectant, almost satisfied, as if the outcome of my application had been as obvious to them as it apparently was to the committee. The conversations that had paused during my entrance resumed with renewed energy, and I caught fragments of discussions about upcoming social events and business opportunities that I would never be invited to share. The hostess smiled at me as I passed her station, but it was the kind of smile reserved for people who are leaving and won't be returning, polite but final, acknowledging my departure without expressing any hope for future encounters. I drove home through the same beautiful Connecticut countryside, but the autumn colors seemed muted now, the colonial charm somehow less welcoming than it had appeared just 2 hours earlier. The setting sun cast long shadows across the road, and I found myself thinking about other shadows, the ones that had followed me through that club despite my achievements, my credentials and my careful preparation. 2 weeks later, I received a formal letter on Riverside Country Club letterhead. The rejection was wrapped in diplomatic language about current membership capacity and alignment with club culture, but the message was crystal clear as morning sunlight. I wasn't welcome. The letter sat unopened on my kitchen counter for an entire evening before I found the courage to read it. When I finally tore open the heavy cream envelope with the club's embossed logo, my hands were shaking slightly, not from nervousness, but from a deep, bone-level understanding that some battles are lost before they ever begin. Dear Miss Richardson, the letter began in perfectly formatted business prose. Thank you for your interest in membership at the Riverside Country Club. After careful consideration by our membership committee, we regret to inform you that we are unable to offer you membership at this time. Due to current membership capacity and our commitment to maintaining the unique culture and character that have defined our club for nearly a century, we must respectfully decline your application. The rest of the letter was filled with the kind of legal language designed to prevent discrimination lawsuits while providing no actual explanation for their decision. They thanked me for my time, wished me well in my future endeavors, and suggested that I might consider reapplying in the future if circumstances changed. But we all knew that circumstances wouldn't change. Not the circumstances that mattered to their decision anyway. That rejection letter sat on my kitchen counter for 3 days before I could bring myself to throw it away. Each time I walked past it while making my morning coffee or preparing dinner, I felt a familiar cocktail of emotions I had hoped to leave behind in my grandmother's stories of the Jim Crow South: humiliation, anger, and that particularly devastating feeling of not being good enough despite all evidence to the contrary. The rational part of my mind understood that this was about them, not me. My qualifications were impeccable, my character references were sterling, and my professional reputation was beyond reproach. David Miller himself had been shocked by the rejection, calling me into his office the day after I received the letter to express his bewilderment and frustration. "Maya, I don't understand it," he had said, genuinely perplexed as he sat behind his mahogany desk. "Your credentials are better than half the people they've admitted in the past 5 years. Charles Harrison and I have been friends for 20 years, and I've never known him to reject a qualified candidate without a compelling reason." I had nodded politely, appreciating his support while recognizing that his confusion was itself a form of privilege. David Miller had never been rejected from anything based on his appearance. He had never walked into a room and felt the temperature change because of his race. He had never had to decode the difference between professional courtesy and genuine welcome. "These things happen," I had replied, maintaining the diplomatic facade that had become second nature in corporate environments. "Perhaps they genuinely don't have space for new members right now." But David wasn't buying it, and neither was I. Within a week, he had learned through his network that the club had admitted 3 new members the same month they rejected my application. A young lawyer whose family had been members for generations, a hedge fund manager who had recently moved from New York, and a telecommunications executive who played golf with several existing members. All 3 men were white. All 3 had similar professional backgrounds to mine. All 3 had been fast-tracked through the application process without the lengthy committee review that had delayed my rejection for 2 weeks. The pattern was impossible to ignore, but equally impossible to prove in any legal sense. Private clubs have broad discretion in membership decisions, and discrimination cases are notoriously difficult to win when the perpetrators are sophisticated enough to avoid explicitly stating their true reasons. I threw myself into work with renewed intensity, staying late at the office and volunteering for additional projects that would demonstrate my value to the firm. If I couldn't find acceptance at the country club, I would prove my worth in the boardroom where merit supposedly mattered more than pedigree. But the rejection had opened a wound I didn't realize was still tender, and small incidents began to accumulate like paper cuts that individually seem insignificant but collectively created deeper injury. At the office holiday party held at a prestigious downtown hotel, a colleague's wife named Patricia asked me if I was new to the area, and seemed genuinely surprised when I mentioned living in Riverside Heights. Her perfectly manicured eyebrows rose slightly as she processed this information, and I could see her mental calculations adjusting to accommodate data that didn't fit her preconceived categories. Oh, she said, her voice carrying a note of surprise that felt uncomfortably familiar. I didn't realize that neighborhood was diversifying. How wonderful that you were able to find something there. The market must be opening up to more varied buyers. The word diversifying hung between us like a diplomatic euphemism for something she couldn't say directly at a corporate function. I smiled politely and excused myself to refresh my drink, but the interaction stayed with me for the rest of the evening. Even my choice of neighborhood, an area I had selected based on proximity to work, quality of schools, and investment potential, was being viewed through the lens of demographic change rather than individual achievement. During a client dinner at Hartford's most exclusive restaurant, I experienced another small but telling incident that reinforced my growing awareness of how I was perceived in these rarefied circles. I had arranged the dinner to present our quarterly market analysis to Thomson Industries, one of our most important clients, and had spent considerable time preparing a presentation that showcased our firm's unique insights into emerging market opportunities. The restaurant was everything I had hoped: impeccable service, an extensive wine list, and the kind of intimate atmosphere that encouraged meaningful conversation about business strategy and long-term planning. I had dressed carefully in a charcoal gray suit that projected authority without being intimidating, and had arrived early to ensure everything was perfect for our 7 o'clock reservation. James Thomson arrived precisely on time, along with his chief financial officer, a woman named Margaret Whitfield, who I recognized as the daughter of the Mr. Whitfield who had served on the country club's membership committee. The coincidence wasn't lost on me, but I maintained my professional demeanor as we were seated at our reserved table overlooking the city. The sommelier approached our table with the kind of deferential attention that expensive restaurants provide to their most valued customers. He was a distinguished gentleman in his 50s with the sort of wine expertise that comes from decades of study and tasting. His knowledge was impressive, and under normal circumstances, I would have enjoyed the opportunity to learn from his recommendations. However, despite my clearly leading the conversation about our preferred vintage and my obvious familiarity with wine terminology, the sommelier repeatedly directed his questions and recommendations to Thomson and his CFO. When I politely interjected to express my preference for a particular Burgundy that would pair well with our entrees, he nodded briefly before returning his attention to my male client. "Mr. Thomson," he said, "perhaps you would prefer something with a bit more body? We have an excellent Bordeaux from 2015 that I think you would find particularly impressive." When I gently corrected the situation, "Actually, I'm hosting this dinner and would prefer to make the wine selection," the sommelier apologized with the kind of excessive enthusiasm reserved for those who've been caught in an unconscious bias. His face flushed slightly as he realized his error, and he spent the next 5 minutes overcompensating with detailed explanations of various options. The interaction was awkward for everyone involved, but what struck me most was Thomson's reaction. Rather than seeming embarrassed by the sommelier's assumption, he appeared mildly annoyed that I had corrected the situation. His expression suggested that I had committed a social faux pas by asserting my role as host rather than accepting the natural order that placed him in charge of the interaction. The rest of the dinner proceeded smoothly from a business perspective. Thomson was impressed by our market analysis and agreed to increase his investment allocation with our firm, but the underlying dynamics never fully recovered from that initial moment of corrected assumptions. The most painful incident occurred during a weekend grocery shopping trip to Whole Foods, the organic market that catered to our affluent neighborhood's preference for locally sourced produce and artisanal products. It was a Saturday morning in late November, and I was selecting ingredients for a dinner party I was hosting for colleagues the following weekend. I was examining organic vegetables in the produce section when I overheard a conversation between two women who were shopping near the expensive imported cheese display. Both were impeccably dressed in the kind of casual weekend attire that costs more than most people's formal wear: cashmere sweaters, designer jeans, and handbags that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. "I'm just saying," one of them was explaining to her companion, "property values are so delicate in neighborhoods like ours. When the demographic makeup starts changing, even good changes, it can affect investment returns over time." Her friend nodded knowingly. "Exactly. We're not talking about anything personal, of course. It's purely economic. But when certain populations start moving into historically exclusive areas, it changes the character of the community. The schools might decline, the local businesses might shift their focus to serve different clientele, and suddenly your home isn't worth what it was 5 years ago." They weren't speaking quietly, and their glances in my direction made it clear that I was Exhibit A in their concerns about declining exclusivity. I was simultaneously invisible, they felt comfortable discussing these concerns in my presence, and hypervisible, I represented the demographic change they were worried about. I continued shopping, filling my cart with the organic vegetables and imported cheeses that demonstrated my ability to participate in their economic ecosystem, but the conversation followed me through the store like an unwelcome soundtrack. Even my grocery shopping apparently was a political act that threatened someone else's sense of order and security. Each incident was small enough to rationalize away if considered in isolation. Maybe the colleague's wife was genuinely curious about neighborhood trends. Perhaps the sommelier was nervous about serving important clients. The women at Whole Foods might have been discussing abstract economic theories rather than making personal judgments about my presence in their community. But collectively, these experiences created a picture I didn't want to acknowledge, that despite my education, my success, and my achievements, I would always be viewed through the lens of my race first and my accomplishments second. No matter how high I climbed or how much I achieved, I would forever be seen as a representative of my demographic group rather than an individual with unique talents and contributions. The breaking point came 6 weeks after my country club rejection when David Miller invited me to what he described as the most important client dinner of the year. Thomson Industries was considering a major expansion of their investment portfolio, and the potential new business could represent $15 million in annual revenue for our firm. "Maya, this is it," David had said during our Monday morning strategy meeting. "Thomson has been impressed with your market analysis, and he specifically requested that you lead the presentation. This could be the account that establishes you as one of the premier investment strategists in the region." I had spent 2 weeks preparing for the dinner, crafting a presentation that showcased not only our firm's capabilities but also my personal expertise in identifying emerging market opportunities that other firms were overlooking. The research was impeccable, the financial projections were conservative but compelling, and the strategic recommendations were tailored specifically to Thomson's corporate culture and risk tolerance. The venue for this crucial dinner was, of all places, the Riverside Country Club. When David informed me of the location during our final preparation meeting, the irony was so thick I could taste it like copper pennies in my mouth. "I know this might be a bit awkward given your application," he said, his expression reflecting genuine concern about putting me in an uncomfortable position. "But Thomson specifically requested to meet at the club. He's been a member for 30 years, and he feels most comfortable conducting serious business in familiar surroundings. Thomson Industries is worth $15 million in annual revenue, Maya. We need to make this work." I nodded professionally, swallowing the bitter taste of compromise that had become increasingly familiar over the past few months. "Of course, David. Whatever's best for the firm and the client relationship. I'm completely comfortable with the venue." But as I dressed for that dinner, choosing my most conservative charcoal suit, my smallest pearl earrings, styling my hair in the most professional way possible, I felt like I was preparing for battle rather than a business meeting. I was code-switching not just my language and demeanor, but my entire existence to make other people comfortable with my presence in their space. I spent extra time on my appearance that evening, understanding that I would be scrutinized more carefully than usual in a venue where my very presence was an anomaly. My makeup was flawless but understated, my jewelry was classic and minimal, and my outfit was designed to project competence and authority without threatening anyone's sense of order. The drive to the club felt like traveling through enemy territory, even though the same beautiful Connecticut countryside looked identical to my previous visit. The autumn foliage had given way to winter's stark beauty, with bare trees creating intricate patterns against the gray December sky. But the landscape that had once seemed welcoming now felt like a carefully maintained facade hiding deeper truths about who belonged and who would always be an outsider. The dinner was a success from a business perspective. My presentation was flawless, my market analysis impressed both Thomson and his senior staff, and by the end of the evening, we had secured a commitment for the expanded investment portfolio that would transform our firm's revenue projections for the following year. Thomson signed our contract over dessert and coffee, praising my insightful perspective on emerging markets and my sophisticated understanding of global economic trends. He even complimented my presentation style, noting that I had a gift for making complex financial concepts accessible to non-specialists. But throughout the evening I felt the familiar weight of performance, the exhausting task of being twice as good, twice as polite, twice as careful to ensure that my presence didn't threaten anyone's sense of comfort or security. Every interaction was calibrated to demonstrate my competence without challenging existing hierarchies, my confidence without appearing threatening, my success without making others feel diminished. The other club members watched our dinner with the kind of polite interest that suggested they were evaluating not just my professional performance but my worthiness to be in their space. Conversations at nearby tables paused whenever I spoke, and I could feel eyes tracking my movements as I navigated the evening with the careful grace of someone who understands that every gesture is being judged. As we said our goodbyes in the club's marble foyer, the same space where I had been so uncomfortable during my membership interview, Thompson shook my hand warmly and delivered what he clearly intended as the highest compliment he could offer. "Ms. Richardson," he said, his voice carrying the particular authority of someone accustomed to having his opinions taken seriously, "you're a credit to your profession. It's refreshing to work with someone who combines analytical rigor with such impressive communication skills. I look forward to a long and profitable relationship with your firm." The phrase, "credit to your profession," echoed in my mind during the drive home through the dark Connecticut countryside. Not talented analyst, or skilled professional, or simply valuable addition to the team. A credit to my profession, as if my competence was somehow unexpected, a pleasant surprise rather than the predictable result of years of education, hard work, and dedication to excellence. The language suggested that my success was remarkable specifically because it contradicted his expectations about what someone who looked like me might be capable of achieving. It was a compliment that revealed more about his assumptions than his appreciation, praise that somehow managed to diminish even as it attempted to elevate. That night, I sat in my pristine suburban kitchen, looking out at my perfectly manicured lawn covered with the first light snow of winter, and felt the profound loneliness of existing in spaces that tolerated me but would never truly accept me. I had achieved everything I had dreamed of since those Sunday mornings in my grandmother's kitchen, yet I felt more isolated than ever. The American dream I had been chasing seemed increasingly like a mirage, always visible on the horizon but somehow moving further away with each step forward. Every professional victory came with the emotional tax of proving myself worthy of opportunities that others took for granted. Every success required not just excellence but a kind of diplomatic perfection that left me exhausted and questioning whether the cost was worth the achievement. It was in that moment of crystalline clarity, sitting in my beautiful home in my exclusive neighborhood after securing the biggest client of my career, that I made a decision that would change everything. If I couldn't find acceptance in their world, perhaps it was time to create my own. The realization didn't come as a dramatic revelation but as a quiet understanding that had been building for months. I was tired of seeking approval from institutions that would never see me as more than an exception to their rules. I was exhausted by the constant performance required to make others comfortable with my success. I was done apologizing for my excellence and explaining my worthiness to people whose own achievements paled in comparison to mine. If the Riverside Country Club didn't want me as a member, perhaps I should consider a different relationship with the institution entirely. The idea came to me during a sleepless night 3 days after the Thompson dinner, while I was scrolling through commercial real estate listings on my laptop, a habit I had developed during my MBA program when I dreamed of eventually starting my own investment firm and needed to understand property values and development opportunities in my target markets. I had been researching commercial properties in the Hartford area, looking for potential opportunities for clients interested in diversifying their portfolios beyond traditional securities. Office buildings, retail spaces, industrial facilities. I was systematically analyzing cap rates and cash flows when I stumbled across a listing that made my heart skip a beat. Riverside Country Club was for sale. The listing was discreet, buried deep in the commercial properties section with minimal description. Prestigious private club on 47 acres. Established 1923. Prime Connecticut location. Georgian colonial clubhouse with dining facilities, championship golf course designed by Donald Ross, tennis courts, swimming facilities and extensive grounds. Seller motivated due to financial restructuring. Serious inquiries only. The asking price was substantial, $12 million, but not impossible, especially for someone with access to investment capital and a network of potential partners who understood the value of hospitality and leisure properties. The price actually seemed low for 47 acres of prime Connecticut real estate with such extensive facilities and such a prestigious reputation. I spent the rest of that sleepless night researching everything I could about the club's financial situation, using the same analytical skills that had made me successful in identifying undervalued investment opportunities. What I discovered was a classic case of old money arrogance meeting new economy reality, a perfect example of how institutional hubris can destroy even the most established enterprises. The club's membership had been declining for over a decade as younger professionals chose more modern, diverse venues for networking and recreation. The Millennial and Gen X executives who represented the future of Connecticut business were increasingly uncomfortable with institutions that felt exclusive in outdated ways. They preferred establishments that reflected their own values around diversity, inclusion, and meritocracy. Meanwhile, the club's aging membership was literally dying off. The average age of active members had increased from 55 to 68 over the past 10 years, and many families were choosing not to renew memberships that had been passed down through generations. The initiation fees and annual dues that had once seemed reasonable to executives making mid-six-figure salaries were increasingly difficult to justify when similar amenities were available at more welcoming venues. The club's financial statements, which I was able to access through public records and industry databases, told a story of steady decline disguised by creative accounting and deferred maintenance. Revenue had dropped by 30% over the past 5 years, while operating expenses had continued to rise due to the costs of maintaining historic facilities and providing the level of service that remaining members expected. Their rejection of my membership application suddenly took on new meaning. It wasn't just discrimination, it was catastrophically bad business. They had turned away a six-figure income because it came attached to the wrong skin color, and their bottom line was suffering for it. In their commitment to maintaining demographic homogeneity, they were rejecting the very professionals who could have revitalized their membership and secured their financial future. I began making calls, starting with former classmates from Wharton who had gone into private equity and investment banking. The conversation with Marcus Chin, who had launched a successful acquisition fund focused on hospitality and leisure properties, was particularly enlightening and encouraging. "Maya, this is brilliant," he said after I outlined my preliminary business plan during a video call from his San Francisco office. "The private club industry is ripe for disruption. These old guard establishments are hemorrhaging money because they've refused to evolve with the times. With the right vision and capital investment, you could transform this into something genuinely profitable while maintaining the prestige factor that makes it valuable." Marcus had been one of my study partners at Wharton, and we had maintained a professional relationship over the years, sharing deal opportunities and market insights. He understood both the financial potential and the social significance of what I was contemplating. "Think about it," he continued, his excitement building as he worked through the possibilities. "You've got prime real estate in one of the wealthiest regions in the country, facilities that would cost $50 million to build today, and a brand that carries a century of prestige. The only thing wrong with the current business model is that it's run by people whose vision is limited by their prejudices." Within 2 weeks, I had assembled a consortium of investors that read like a who's who of successful professionals who had been excluded from traditional old boy networks. Marcus Chin with his hospitality expertise, Priya Patel, a successful tech entrepreneur who had sold her software company for $200 million, David Kim, a hedge fund manager who specialized in distressed assets, Maria Rodriguez, a private equity partner who focused on business transformations, and surprisingly, David Miller himself, who saw the opportunity for what it was, a chance to get in on the ground floor of transforming an outdated business model. David's decision to join our investor group was particularly significant. His participation lent credibility to our bid and demonstrated that even establishment figures recognized the club's need for fundamental change. During our confidential discussion about the opportunity, he had been remarkably candid about the club's problems. "Maya, I've been a member for 15 years and I've watched the place slowly commit suicide," he had said during a private dinner at a downtown restaurant where we could speak freely. "The membership committee is so focused on maintaining their little kingdom that they're destroying the very institution they claim to be protecting. They've rejected dozens of qualified candidates over the past few years, and most of them were exactly the kind of professionals who could have brought fresh energy and new revenue to the club. Our due diligence process was meticulous and comprehensive. We analyzed membership trends going back 20 years, examined financial records in detail, conducted market research on what modern professionals wanted in a private club experience, and engaged consultants who specialized in hospitality industry turnarounds. What we found confirmed my initial hypothesis. Riverside Country Club wasn't failing because of location, facilities, or market conditions. It was failing because of leadership that had prioritized demographic purity over business sustainability. While they were rejecting qualified applicants like me, other country clubs in the region were thriving by embracing diversity and modernizing their approach to membership and programming. The Brookfield Country Club, just 30 miles away, had increased membership by 40% over the past 5 years by implementing inclusive policies and updating their facilities to appeal to younger professionals. The Hartford Golf Club had successfully rebranded itself as a business networking venue that attracted tech entrepreneurs and finance professionals who valued substance over legacy connections. Even more telling was our analysis of the professionals who had been rejected by Riverside over the past decade. The list read like a directory of Connecticut's most successful emerging leaders: tech executives, healthcare entrepreneurs, legal professionals, and finance specialists who had gone on to join other clubs or create their own networking organizations. Riverside's loss had been everyone else's gain, and their financial decline was the predictable result of systematically excluding the very people who could have ensured their continued success. The formal offer process was handled through lawyers and business intermediaries to maintain confidentiality until the deal was finalized. We structured the acquisition as a leveraged buyout that would allow us to take control of the club while using its own assets as collateral for the financing. The sellers, a committee representing the club's board of directors, were motivated by their urgent need for capital and their recognition that the current trajectory was unsustainable. What made the process particularly satisfying was that Mr. Harrison and his membership committee didn't know who was behind the acquisition until the day we signed the papers. They had been told only that a group of Connecticut business professionals had formed an investment consortium to purchase and revitalize the club under new management. The closing took place on a gray February morning in the same conference room where I had been politely rejected 9 months earlier. I will never forget walking into that space, this time flanked by my attorney, my accountant, and Marcus Chin as my lead investor, carrying the documents that would make me the majority owner of the Riverside Country Club. The sellers' representatives were already seated around the mahogany table. Charles Harrison looking uncomfortable in his role as spokesperson for the outgoing board, Mr. Pemberton fidgeting with his gold pen, and several other club officials whose expressions suggested they were attending a funeral rather than a business transaction. The lawyers handled most of the technical discussions about warranties, liabilities, and transition procedures, but I paid careful attention to Harrison's body language as the reality of the situation gradually became clear to him. When our lead attorney introduced me as the primary investor and managing partner of the acquiring entity, Harrison's carefully composed expression cracked like fine china. His eyes widened with recognition and something that looked like panic as he realized who I was. The woman he had rejected for membership 9 months earlier was now purchasing his club. Mr. Pemberton actually dropped his pen, the gold instrument clattering against the mahogany table in the sudden silence that filled the room. "Miss Richardson," Harrison stammered, his voice carrying none of the condescending authority I remembered from our previous encounter. We had no idea you were the buyer." "It's Dr. Richardson now," I corrected gently, having completed my doctorate in business administration during the acquisition process, a goal I had set for myself as part of my personal development plan. And yes, I imagine this comes as quite a surprise. The beauty of the moment wasn't in their discomfort, though I would be lying if I said I didn't feel a deep satisfaction in their obvious bewilderment. The real beauty was in the realization that their rejection had been the catalyst for something far more significant than club membership. Their no had forced me to envision a yes, so much bigger than anything I had originally imagined. Instead of seeking acceptance into their declining institution, I was now positioned to transform it entirely. Rather than hoping they would allow me to join their exclusive circle, I was creating a new paradigm that would make their approval irrelevant. The paperwork was signed with minimal conversation beyond the necessary legal confirmations. As the former board members gathered their materials and prepared to leave, Harrison approached me with the kind of humility that comes from having your worldview fundamentally challenged. "Dr. Richardson," he said quietly, I hope you'll be able to preserve the traditions that have made this place special for so many years." I looked at him directly, feeling the weight of history and possibility in equal measure. "Mr. Harrison, I intend to preserve everything about this club that truly makes it special. The beautiful facilities, the excellent service, the sense of community and tradition. But I also intend to ensure that those special qualities are available to everyone who deserves them, regardless of what they look like or where their families came from." He nodded slowly, perhaps understanding for the first time that the traditions he had been protecting had actually been destroying the institution he claimed to love. As I stood in that conference room, the same space where they had decided I wasn't good enough to join their club, holding the deed that made me the owner of their entire world, I felt a profound sense of completion. Not revenge exactly, but justice. Not bitterness, but transformation. Their rejection had become my liberation. Their limitation had become my opportunity. Their no had forced me to create a yes that was bigger and better than anything they had ever imagined. The best part was knowing that this was just the beginning. The transformation of Riverside Country Club began immediately after the acquisition was finalized. Working with a team of hospitality consultants, interior designers, and business strategists, we developed a comprehensive plan to modernize the facilities while preserving their classic elegance and historic character. The first major change was philosophical rather than physical. We implemented a membership policy based solely on professional qualifications and character references, eliminating the informal networks and unspoken barriers that had kept the club homogeneous for nearly a century. Applications would be evaluated on clear, objective criteria: professional achievement, community involvement, financial stability, and character references from current members or respected community leaders. The old system of blackball voting, where a single existing member could veto any applicant for any reason, was replaced with a transparent scoring system that required specific justifications for any rejection. We also established an appeals process and an ombudsman position to ensure that all applicants received fair consideration regardless of their background or connections. The physical improvements were equally dramatic but carefully designed to enhance rather than replace the club's traditional appeal. The formal dining room that had felt so coldly intimidating during my first visit was reimagined as a warm, welcoming space where business could be conducted and relationships built. We updated the lighting to be more flattering and inclusive, expanded the bar area to encourage networking, and added private dining rooms for corporate events and client meetings. The golf course received attention from a specialist in historic course restoration who worked to honor Donald Ross's original design while updating irrigation systems and incorporating environmentally sustainable maintenance practices. We added a state-of-the-art practice facility with technology that appealed to younger golfers while maintaining the classic character that longtime members valued. The tennis facilities were expanded and modernized with new courts and a dedicated tennis pavilion that could host both casual play and competitive tournaments. We partnered with the local high school to offer youth programming that introduced the game to students from diverse backgrounds while providing volunteer opportunities for members who wanted to give back to the community. But the most significant changes were cultural rather than architectural. Within 6 months of the acquisition, our membership included successful professionals from every conceivable background: tech entrepreneurs, healthcare executives, teachers, artists, small business owners, and corporate leaders representing the full diversity of Connecticut's professional community. Dr. Amara Okafor, a Nigerian-American cardiac surgeon who had been rejected by 3 other country clubs, became one of our first new members and quickly established herself as a leader in our medical networking group. James Liu, a Chinese-American tech entrepreneur whose family had been in Connecticut for 4 generations, joined with his teenage daughter who became the first Asian-American member of our junior golf program. Sarah and Michael Washington, a power couple who ran a successful law firm specializing in corporate litigation, brought their expertise to our legal networking events while their twin sons participated in our expanded youth tennis program. Rabbi David Goldstein and Dr. Aisha Patel formed an interfaith dialogue group that met monthly in our private dining rooms to discuss ethics in business and professional life. Each new member brought not just their membership dues and dining revenue, but their professional networks, their community connections, and their fresh perspectives on what a modern country club could and should be. The first major event under new management was a networking brunch designed to introduce new members and celebrate the club's evolution. As I stood in that same dining room where I had once felt so unwelcome, watching a diverse group of professionals building genuine connections over champagne and conversation, I felt a profound sense of completion. Marcus Chun flew in from San Francisco for the event, bringing his champagne flute in hand and a wide grin on his face as